smoke and ash. I rolled over and smashed my blaring alarm clock. As my hazy vision started to clear, I saw the time, 6 a.m., glowing from the shattered display, as if to mock my exhausted body and confirm that I had indeed spent the past 8 hours in bed. I had grown used to feeling unrested no matter how long I slept, but it never got any easier. I dragged myself through the day, completing tasks with little awareness or understanding of what I was actually doing. Stumbling into the kitchen, I poured myself a bowl of cereal. The Cap'n Crunch always tore up the roof of my mouth, but the sharp pain helped jolt me awake. Next came the scalding hot coffee. I had become completely dependent on it. I took a deep drink and glanced at my watch, 6:55 a.m. How had the time slipped away so quickly? I was already running late. I cranked the shower's hot water and waited for the familiar rattle of the pipes. As steam began to rise over the curtain, I stepped in. The warmth engulfed me, and I let myself relax until I noticed the smell. Smoke, ash, like I'd spent the night beside a campfire. I shrugged it off, just like I had on other mornings. I figured the heat had opened my pores, releasing old scents of smoke and ash lingering from who knows when. As a swimmer, I'd experienced something similar. Sometimes, even months after being in the pool, the right shower temperature would bring out the smell of chlorine. On the drive to work, I sipped my second cup of coffee. Walking through the office doors, I glanced at my watch again. 8:06 a.m. Damn, late again. I took my seat at my desk and logged into my computer. Somewhere between logging in and opening my email, I must have zoned out. But I was quickly snapped back by the sound of Mike, my supervisor. "Josh, would you do me the privilege of accompanying me to my office?" he said. I followed him reluctantly to the room at the end of the hallway. He sat across from me and started in on his usual lecture about my punctuality. I tried to focus, but the cup of coffee back at my desk had already sunk its claws into my thoughts. "Josh, are you even listening to me?" he asked. I snapped back to attention and gave a weak nod. "Damn it, Josh, I'm going to be honest with you. You look like hell. Look at the bags under your eyes. Seriously, you need some rest. Now, I value you as an employee, so here's what we're going to do. Take the rest of the day off. I'll pay you for it, but I want you to go home and get some sleep." I appreciated the gesture, and as I walked through my front door, I kicked off my shoes and headed straight to my room. Without hesitation, I climbed into bed. I rolled over and slammed my blaring alarm clock. As my blurry vision started to sharpen, I realized I wasn't just exhausted, I was in pain. Sitting up, I rolled up my sleeves and was shocked to find burns covering my forearms and hands. They weren't severe, but the pain was sharp and unmistakable. I jumped out of bed and quickly applied cream and wrapped the burns in bandages. A glance at my watch made my heart sink. It was already 7:15 a.m. Damn, I was late. No time for breakfast, no time for a shower, just coffee. I brewed a quick cup, grabbed it, and bolted out the door. As I stepped into work, I whispered a silent prayer and checked my watch. 7:55 a.m. I was actually on time. Right on cue, Mike appeared. "Hey Josh, how's it going? Hope that time off did the trick," he said with a wide grin. He meant well, I knew that. But right then, I couldn't focus on anything but the stinging pain in my forearms. Where had the burns come from? My thoughts were foggy, and even the simplest tasks felt impossible to complete. After what felt like an eternity, the workday finally ended. I climbed into my truck and headed home. Could I have burned myself and forgotten about it? No, absolutely not. Could someone have broken into my home during the night? That seemed impossible. Still, could the smoky, ashy smell I'd been noticing in my morning showers have something to do with it? No, of course not, right? At this point, I wasn't sure of anything anymore. But one thing I did know, something had happened to me last night. As I crawled into bed, ready to surrender to sleep, I glanced across the room at my desk. My laptop was still on, but the webcam light glowing red. I had left it recording, just in case. It was a long shot, sure, but the burns weren't something I could just ignore. I chuckled softly at the absurdity of it all and gave the camera a little wave goodnight. I rolled over and silenced my alarm clock again. Getting up, I walked straight over to the laptop. The red light was still glowing. Shaking my head, slightly embarrassed by my own paranoia, I closed the laptop and went to grab breakfast. Then, stepping into the shower, I was hit with a familiar scent, but this time it was overpowering. The smoke and ash I'd grown used to noticing in the hot water were so strong they made my eyes water. I climbed out, dried off, and got dressed for work. My watch read 7:20 a.m. I barely had time. Rushing out the door, I opened my garage and was instantly hit by a new, sharp stench. Ammonia. It was unmistakable. The garage was filled with it. The smell was so strong it made me gag, but I didn't have time to think it through. I climbed into my truck, trying to push it all out of my mind, and sped off to work. It had been another long day at work. I couldn't stop thinking about the strange pattern of events. Smoke and ash in the shower, burns on my arms, the overwhelming ammonia stench in the garage. What the hell was happening? The day crawled by, every hour stretching longer than the last. But finally, I made it home. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt an invisible pull toward my bedroom. I found myself standing silently in front of my desk, staring at my laptop. A wave of shame washed over me. This was insane. Surely there had to be a rational explanation. People go through weird phases. This was nothing more than that, right? But I couldn't convince myself. I pulled out the chair, sat down, and opened the laptop. The video loaded quickly, showing me climbing into bed the night before. I looked up at the camera, chuckled, and gave it a wave. Then nothing. The room went dark, and the camera captured only my restless shifting beneath the sheets. I squinted at the faint numbers on my alarm clock. 1:30 a.m., just as my bedroom door began to creak open. A pale figure entered slowly. It looked human, but eerily wrong. Naked, towering, it had to duck to step through the doorway. It moved with quiet purpose, approaching the side of my bed before kneeling beside me. One long, bony arm extended, and with a single finger, it tapped me on the shoulder. I sat up, expressionless, robotic. I stood and followed it out of the room. The footage showed no movement again until 5:45 a.m., when I reappeared, walking calmly back to my bed and lying down as if nothing had happened. I stared at the screen in stunned silence. Horrified, didn't even begin to describe what I was feeling. I had absolutely no memory of any of it. What was that thing? Why had it come to my room? Why had I followed it without hesitation? And most disturbing of all, what had it done to me? A terrible thought gripped me. What if it came back? I couldn't stay in that house. Panic surged through me as I rushed to pack a few essentials, just a change of clothes and some toiletries. I jumped into my truck and pulled out of the garage, heading to a hotel across town. For a fleeting moment, I noticed the sunset in the rearview mirror, strangely vibrant, almost hauntingly beautiful. The drive wasn't long, but night had fully fallen by the time I arrived. The woman at the front desk greeted me warmly. She handed me my room key and told me I'd be staying in room 318. After wandering the maze-like hallways and getting lost twice, I finally found it. It was dark, and I was drained. I dropped my bag and collapsed onto the bed. I reached for the hotel's alarm clock and set it. Then, on impulse, I set my watch's alarm for 1:29 a.m. If that thing somehow knew where I was, if it showed up again, I wanted to be awake when it did. I rolled over and pressed the button on my watch to silence the alarm. Another press lit up the screen, 1:29 a.m. I sat up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. That's when I saw it. Across the room, cloaked in shadows, was a pale face staring directly at me. I jolted back, pressing against the headboard in panic. The face didn't move. It just stared, still and unblinking. I froze too afraid to breathe, let alone look away. I don't know how long I sat there, heart hammering in my chest, waiting to see what it would do. But gradually, my vision sharpened, and I noticed something. A wooden frame surrounding the face. It took me a second to understand. It was a painting on the wall. Relief crashed over me like a wave. My body trembled as I slowly relaxed. I couldn't believe how real it had seemed. Smiling faintly at my own paranoia, I lay back down. As sleep crept in, I felt strangely content, reassured that whatever I'd feared would happen, hadn't. I rolled over and slammed my hand on the alarm clock. My blurry vision cleared slowly as I sat up, memories of the night before beginning to come back. I looked toward the far wall and froze. There was no painting. It was a window. That thing, it had been watching me from outside. Terror didn't even begin to cover what I felt. But this was beyond fear now. I had to accept the truth. There was no rational explanation for what was happening. Does it come every night? How did it find me here? How does it get into my home? I didn't have answers, but I knew I wasn't going to work today. I picked up my phone and called in sick. There was no way I could concentrate, not when my mind was reeling, not when my instincts screamed that something was deeply wrong. I had plans now. I needed to know the truth. Later that morning, I found myself in an electronics store, poring over rows of security cameras. I spent nearly an hour comparing features before making my choice. Once home, I set everything up carefully. 2 cameras in the bedroom, each offering a different angle. 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the living room, 1 in the garage, another in the hallway. Tomorrow, at least, I would have answers. That night, I laid my head on the pillow and waited for sleep. But as expected, it refused to come. My body tossed and turned, restless with anticipation and dread. Finally, I got up and rummaged through the medicine cabinet. Finding a half-empty bottle of NyQuil, I chugged it and stumbled back to bed. My last clear memory was glancing at the alarm clock as it glowed 12:48 a.m. I rolled over and slammed my blaring alarm clock. As my vision slowly cleared, I dragged myself out of bed and made my way to the kitchen to brew some coffee. Mug in hand, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop to review the security footage. Everything appeared normal until 1:29 a.m. The camera facing the front door picked up movement. The lock turned and the door creaked open. That same tall, pale figure ducked through the frame and stepped into my home. His movements were slow but deliberate, as if he had done this many times before. He moved across the living room, down the hall, and stopped at my bedroom door. That's when I realized something disturbing. The footage had no sound. None. Not a single creak or footstep. It wasn't just quiet. It was silent. Unnaturally so. He stood motionless for a few seconds, then opened the door to my room. Just like before, he walked over to my bedside, knelt down, extended one long bony finger, and gently tapped my shoulder. Instantly, I sat up and rose to my feet, completely expressionless. I followed him out of the room. He exited through the front door, but this time I didn't follow him outside. I turned toward the garage. I climbed into my truck and drove away. The footage was uneventful until just before 5:45 a.m. My truck pulled into the garage, and I exited with only minutes to spare before climbing back into bed. On a second viewing, I noticed something else. I was wearing different clothes when I returned. I had hoped the cameras would bring clarity. Instead, I was more confused than ever. Sitting in front of the screen, I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. The figure, whatever it was, never frightened me when I awoke. It never spoke a word, yet I seemed to understand what it wanted. I followed without hesitation. It didn't appear to want to harm me, so why had I come back burned? The following night, the footage revealed something new. At exactly 1:29 a.m., the figure entered the house. He waited by my bedroom door until the clock struck 1:30. Then, as before, he entered and woke me. But this time, after I stood up, he simply closed the door behind me and left the house. I sat down at my desk and began typing on the laptop. I pulled up Facebook, and searched for someone's profile. The camera's resolution wasn't high enough to see who it was, but I scrolled through every photo, every post. I spent over an hour studying everything about this person's life. Once there was nothing left to read, I opened a few other tabs, then sat motionless, staring at a blank screen until 5:45 a.m. Then I shut the laptop and returned to bed. The next morning, I opened my browser to see who I had been stalking. My history had been deleted. That night, I tried something different. Before bed, I left a note beside my laptop. It read, "What are you doing? What is that thing?" At 1:30 a.m., just like clockwork, the figure entered my room and woke me. He guided me to the desk and pointed to the note. I picked it up, read it, and then took a pen and scribbled a reply. Afterward, I turned and followed him out the front door. When I woke up the next morning, the note was still on the desk. Underneath my original question, I had written, "Do not ask questions when you are unprepared for answers." This had gone too far. I couldn't let it continue. Frustrated and desperate, I drove back to the electronics store and bought a small GPS tracker. Back home, I crouched beside my truck and secured it underneath the frame. I was going to find out exactly where I was going during the night. Before heading to bed, I decided to try leaving a note one more time. I wrote, "I have to know what is happening to me." The next morning, I reviewed the footage. It revealed little. At 1:30 a.m., as always, the figure entered and gently woke me. It motioned toward the note on my desk. I read it, set it down without writing a response, and followed him out the front door. Moments later, I climbed into my truck and drove away. At 5:45 a.m., I returned, climbed into bed, and lay still. This was my moment. I jumped from my chair and rushed to the garage. Within seconds, I was back at my desk, clutching the GPS tracker in my hand. For a brief moment, doubt crept in, but I pushed it down and plugged the device into the USB port. A map loaded on my screen, displaying a dotted line that marked my truck's route overnight. Each stop was logged with timestamps. I had driven roughly 30 minutes east to a familiar residential neighborhood. I had remained there for 16 minutes. After that, the route continued back toward home, diverting onto an old dirt road deep within the nearby wildlife reserve. I stayed there until 5 a.m. I didn't hesitate. I climbed into my truck and retraced the GPS path, determined to uncover the truth. When I reached the first stop, a cold nausea twisted in my gut. I was parked in front of Richard Marx's house. Years ago, back in middle school, he made my life miserable. He was a relentless bully, someone I hadn't thought about in ages. There was no reason, no good reason, I would willingly visit his house. Still, I forced myself to step out of the truck. I walked up the path to the large oak door of his grand, pristine home. His family had always been well off, and it showed. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my stomach in knots. I didn't know what I was expecting, or even what I wanted to find. But I raised my hand and knocked. Nothing. I waited, then knocked again. Still nothing. The house was silent. No one was home. Climbing back into my truck, I stole one last glance at the house. The sick feeling in my stomach was only growing stronger as I turned the ignition and followed the route to the wildlife reserve. I pulled onto the long, empty dirt road. The place was eerily quiet, and according to the GPS, I was only minutes from where I had parked the night before. As I pulled up to the location, I was struck by how utterly unremarkable it was. No trails, no signs, nothing distinctive or notable about the spot, just trees and dirt. Still, I stepped out of the truck and stood there, unsure of what to do next. I scanned the tree line, half expecting something, anything to reveal itself, but nothing did. With a deep breath, I decided to leave the truck behind and investigate on foot. I moved slowly through the forest, my senses on high alert. Every sound, every movement of leaves felt amplified. For over an hour, I wandered the woods, examining tree trunks, rocks, anything that could hold a clue. But there was nothing. just wilderness. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I finally accepted defeat. I turned and began jogging back through the trees toward the road. That's when I stumbled into it. A clearing, roughly 40 feet across, opened up before me. At its center was a massive fire pit, carefully formed with a ring of smooth stones blackened with ash. The remains of what must have been a towering bonfire lay in the middle. I froze, staring at it in disbelief. I don't know how long I stood there, motionless, processing what I was seeing. Eventually, I looked up. The sun had nearly vanished beyond the horizon. I circled the area, desperate to find any other clues, something that might tell me what had happened here. There was nothing, aside from a large rock formation on the edge of the clearing. Hoping for a better view, I climbed about 10 feet up the rocks to get a vantage point. From up high, I surveyed the fire pit once more. Still nothing. But as I turned to look away, I spotted something between the rocks. A large, narrow crevice. A new feeling overtook me. Not fear. I had already felt fear. This was different. A strange sense of familiarity, as if something was calling to me, welcoming me. Without thinking, I slipped down into the space between the rocks. The light was fading fast, and I knew I didn't have much time. As I squeezed through, I realized the space was widening. It was more than a crack. It was a tunnel leading downward beneath the rock. Cold air flowed from within. The deeper I went, the colder and darker it became. The tunnel slowly expanded around me, and my footsteps began to echo ahead, bouncing off unseen stone. It was turning into a cavern. The last remnants of daylight above didn't reach me here. I was swallowed by total darkness. And just like that, the familiarity vanished. The sense of being welcomed was gone, replaced by something else. Terror. I could feel my hands shaking. My breath quickened. Every nerve screamed at me to turn around. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, stumbling as I scrambled back up through the rocks, desperate to escape. I didn't stop once I reached the surface. I didn't look back. I just ran, through the clearing, through the woods, all the way to my truck. And I didn't breathe easy until I was behind the wheel again. Back at home, I tried to process everything I had discovered. It was horrifying. I knew, without a doubt, that I had been there before. That clearing, that tunnel, that's where I'd been spending my nights. I regretted not going deeper into the cavern, but deep down, I knew there was nothing that could have convinced me to continue. Not then. I sat on the edge of my bed, unable to sleep, overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness. What was I supposed to do now? Hours passed. I glanced at my alarm clock, 2:13 a.m. The figure hadn't come. A thought struck me, a plan. The following night, I lay down in bed, feeling confident. I was convinced I had cracked the code. The figure always appeared at exactly 1:29 a.m. and entered my room at 1:30. Even at the hotel, when I had been awake, it left me alone. Maybe if I disrupted the pattern, if I simply stayed awake, it wouldn't come. I rolled over to the sharp blare of my alarm clock. Blinking the sleep from my eyes, I checked the time. 1:25 a.m. I sat up and fixed my gaze on the glowing digits. I watched the seconds crawl by. 1:26, 1:27, 1:28, 1:29. I held my breath, ears straining to detect even the faintest noise from elsewhere in the house. 1:30. I was sure the door was about to creak open. I could almost feel it. 1:31, 1:32, 1:33. I continued watching until 1:40. Still nothing. Finally, I exhaled, grinning with relief. I had figured it out. That was all it took. Just stay awake at 1:30 and it wouldn't come. It was that simple. From then on, I set my alarm every night for 1:25 a.m. Like clockwork, I sat upright, eyes fixed on the numbers. Reviewing the security footage confirmed what I suspected. The figure never returned. It never entered the house. Waking at 1:25 and watching the clock became my nightly ritual. And for a while, it worked. Weeks passed with no incidents. Despite waking in the middle of the night, I felt more rested and energized than ever. No more unexplained trips. No more terror. I was finally getting real sleep. I was arriving to work on time. The bags beneath my eyes vanished. Even the fear, the deep gnawing fear that had lived inside me, began to fade. Then came the night I slipped. I awoke and glanced at the clock. 1:26, 1:27. And the last thing I remembered was seeing the clock roll over to 1:28 a.m. I had let my guard down. I'd let sleep take me. I woke to a soft, warm glow. Cold, damp earth pressed against my skin. Above me, stone. I blinked, trying to focus. My eyes widened in panic as I realized where I was. The cavern. I had made it to the end of the tunnel. I slowly rose to my feet, heart pounding, senses screaming for me to run. But where? The space was massive, lit only by scattered torches fixed into the walls, casting flickering shadows across the stone. Which way led back to the surface? I stood frozen, scanning the cavern for any sign, any indication of a way out. Then I saw it, emerging from the shadows. The tall, pale figure. It was here, before me. Until now, I had only seen glimpses of the figure through the grainy footage. But here, now, he stood before me in full clarity. He was massive, towering at least 8 feet tall. I could feel the malice radiating from him, an almost physical pressure that made the air around me feel heavy. His skin was smooth and pale, almost like porcelain, but wrong, unnervingly lifeless. His face was minimal, just 2 black, soulless eyes and a single horizontal gash where a mouth should have been. Then he grinned. His lips pulled back to reveal a disturbingly straight row of human-like teeth. And then, to my horror, he began to speak. At first, it was incomprehensible. A dozen smaller slits tore open across his face, each forming a grotesque little mouth. From each came a voice, all speaking different tongues at once. Some languages were vaguely familiar, others completely foreign, and a few sounded demonic, like guttural growls and hisses not meant for human ears. The cacophony of voices bounced off the stone walls, reverberating through my skull. My head throbbed violently, and I collapsed to the cold ground. As I looked up at him, the chaos ceased. He opened his mouth once more, but this time, each mouth spoke in perfect, chilling English. How many times have you betrayed yourself? How many times have you witnessed the cruelty of man and turned a blind eye? How many times have you swallowed your rage, letting it boil inside you? It is that rage, buried deep within your soul, that drew me here. Make no mistake, I am not your captor. You are no prisoner in this place. You wanted this, and even now, you betray yourself again. Weak, shaking, unwilling to face what you know must be done. Behold your work. My eyes had adjusted to the dim light, and behind the figure, I saw them. Piles of charred bones scattered across the cavern floor. Dozens, maybe hundreds. I couldn't speak. My stomach twisted violently, and I doubled over, vomiting onto the stone floor. The figure laughed, a chorus of voices echoing with amusement. You may spend the rest of your life denying this truth, he said, but know it in your soul. You chose this. You were complicit. My voice was barely audible, trembling, but I forced the words out. I never wanted this. The figure stepped closer, and the grin widened. As powerful as I may be, even I cannot force a man to do what he does not already desire. And these people, you've seen them. You know what they are. Abusers, predators, parasites. You've seen their cruelty. You chose to be the answer. I backed away, crawling in panic. The sound of laughter surrounded me, echoing from every corner of the cavern. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I expected him to stop me, but he didn't. As I fled up the tunnel, his voice followed, booming and inescapable. As long as your desire exists, this will continue. It's been 3 days since then. I've had time to think, to reflect on his words. I never believed I could want harm for anyone. But this morning, as I stood in the shower, I caught the scent again, the unmistakable stench of smoke and ash. And this time, I smiled.